solo podcasters. I'm excited to talk to you today and share with you the 5 tips for success as a solo podcaster. So let's get right to it. Hey y'all, Crystal here today, and I just wanted to tell you, as of me recording this, I've recorded over 450 episodes just for my daily solo podcast. That doesn't include all the other episodes that I've done for the Proffitt Podcast. That is just for my daily podcast, The Potty Report. This show is 5 minutes or less, and what I've learned in creating so much content for this specific podcast, there's so many. There's so many things that I've learned, so many lessons, so many do's, so many don'ts. But today I want to share with you the 5 tips for success with creating your own solo podcast. So I actually have some notes because I wrote all these down, right? Because I practice what I preach. I have some notes for you. And the first one that is probably the most important that I haven't shared too much here on the channel is you have to practice. Like, you legitimately have to practice by just talking to yourself on a regular basis. I know, it sounds kind of weird, but my good friend Heather Sager, you can find more about her and listen to her podcast, The Heather Sager Show here. She has this technique called word vomiting. I know it sounds a little gross, but it's so good because she says, we're planning whenever we're writing our notes, whether it's in a notebook, it's in a Google Doc, it's in Asana, you're writing all your notes down, how you think it's going to come out, and what happens. If you're a solo podcaster, you've been podcasting for any amount of time, you know that what you think in your head doesn't always come out of your mouth that way. And so she recommends that you practice talking. She's a public speaking coach. Of course, this is it's genius, right? It's so simple. So I want you to start thinking about what your solo podcast topics are going to be, and then talk them out in the shower. Talk them out while you're getting ready. Talk them out while you're working out, you're walking the dog, playing with your kids, whatever it looks like for you, but just practicing being confident in how a message goes from your brain to your mouth and into the microphone is so important. So practice. That is tip number 1. Tip number 2 for having a successful solo podcast is you must have an outline. You absolutely must have an outline. This is so important, and you can go watch these videos right here all about whether you should have a script or an outline and what that looks like. I'm not a big fan of having everything scripted, but if that works for you, that's fantastic. But at bare minimum, you must have an outline. I don't care if it's just, I just happen to have one right here, a note card with some notes scribbled on it, or a notebook, a Google Doc, whatever that looks like. You've got to have an outline, because if you are talking and it is just you, right? That's what a solo podcast is. And you go off on a tangent, who's going to bring you back in? Right? If you're on an interview with someone, they can be like, let's change the subject. Let's go down these rabbit holes. There's other issues you have to worry about with an interview. But if it's just you and you're going off on all these tangents and you're like, wait, what was the point that I was trying to make? No, don't do that. Have an outline. That way you can stick to the point of what you're trying to make for your solo episodes. And this kind of rolls into tip number 3, and that is, don't be afraid to cut yourself off. Now, what do I mean by this? I have recorded, like I said, more than 450 plus podcast episodes that are totally by myself. And I can tell you, whenever I start talking, we've all been there, you're talking and you're like, in your head, you're like, words are still coming out of your mouth, but in your head, you're like, what was the point of me telling this story? Why? What was I actually even saying? Cut it off. And then you can you'll be able to fix it in the editing room later. You can go back and find a place maybe where you started telling that story, but don't be afraid just to stop. Just stop talking. If you know it's going off on a rabbit trail, because if you keep talking longer and longer and longer, that's just going to make for more editing for you. So I recommend, because no one else is there, how are they going to know that you just stopped talking? Just cut off that story point, hit stop if you need to, and don't edit right then. We'll fix it later in the editing room. But what you should do is just stop talking and cut bait on a story. Don't be afraid to do that. Actually, I would love it if you would tell me in the comments, have you experienced any of that where you start trailing off on a story and you're like, wait, what was I actually talking about? Please, just put a yes. Put a yes in the comments because I just want to know I'm not the only one that's done this. Okay, tip number 4 for success with a solo podcast: batching will make your life so much easier. Batching your podcast, especially if you consistently have solo episodes, record multiple shows at one time. You should not do all this planning, all this work, and do it every single week. Batch your podcast. Go watch this video right here. I walk you step by step on how to batch podcast episodes. It's life-changing. It's life-changing. I'm just going to tell you that right now. It's so much, like, whenever I have energy and I'm like, oh man, I'm feeling good today. I'm ready to record. I will record 3 or 4 episodes at one time instead of just saying, okay, I felt good this week, but next week I'm going to feel like crap and I'm not going to feel, no, don't do that. Batch your podcast episodes for sure. And I saved the best for last. And tip number 5 that I have for you is pretend that you are talking to that one person in your audience. That one person that you're trying to reach, whether that is an ideal listener persona, an ideal customer, or whoever it is for you. Imagine that you are talking to that person. They are right on the other side of that microphone, because whenever I show up to record my solo podcast and I'm thinking about that one person that maybe asked me the question that I'm talking about that day, or the one person who I know needs to hear this message the most, everything comes out a lot easier. I don't know, there's just something to be said of whenever you have that connection of, this is my purpose, this is exactly who I'm talking to, and you push those two together and like bing, I feel like we need like a little like lightning bolt or something, because magic happens whenever you are connecting with that one listener in your audience. So make sure that you take time, maybe take a deep breath right before you start recording and say, who am I talking to in this particular episode? But that's all I have for you today. 5 tips for success with a solo podcast. Make sure you put any questions below in the comments if you have any. And as always, make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video if you found it helpful. Subscribe below if you haven't already and you have found what we were talking about today super helpful. Make sure you check out these other videos right here, all about podcasting and running your online business. And remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere.